We're putting students into situations that they can then apply as they do things like start to invest, as they consider careers, as they start to think about what they're going to do after high school.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Fleming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Rise and Stride. With me today is Tim Renzetta, co-founder of NextGen Personal Finance, a nonprofit that believes all high school students deserve a high-quality, engaging, and relevant personal finance education prior to graduation. NextGen Personal Finance serves more than 100,000 educators and reaches more than 3 million students annually with curriculum, professional development, and advocacy tools to increase access. Prior to launching NextGen Personal Finance in 2013, Tim held management and C-level positions at various companies where he managed financial operations and built sales functions, among other many successes. Tim, thanks for joining us today. I am so excited to talk to you.
Denise, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. And this is a passion of mine. And I know as well many of our members, because they started, I think, the financial literacy, our program, not as large as yours, but our program many years ago. So it was a passion of a number of our members as well. So this is going to be a great conversation. Can't wait. So let's get started. And maybe you can tell us, you were in the financial arena for many, many years, but what was kind of that light bulb moment where you said, I need to do this and know there's a gap and I have to be the one that really tries to solve this?
Yeah, it's funny. You don't really, there was a quote I remember from a commencement address Steve Jobs gave at Stanford, which I think definitely resonates with me. And that is, you can't connect the dots in your life until later. And so I go all the way back to when I was 7 years old and I had a bank account and I had a job. My neighbor broke her hip and she needed someone to walk her dog. And every Friday, Mrs. Battison gave me a crisp $5 bill and I walked to the local bank and deposited that. And it was the beginning of a savings habit. And then when I think about the family I grew up in, both of my parents, I was one of the fortunate few that actually got this education at home. My dad was a banker. He rose up from the ranks of teller to become an executive vice president at Barclays Bank. And for my mom, raising 6 kids wasn't enough. So she was the one who wrote the newsletter for the parish. She was the Girl Scout troop leader. She did Story Hour for probably 40 years. So there was I always had the financial smarts growing up because of what my parents gave me. And then there was this idea of giving back. And so when I had an opportunity to volunteer at a local high school in East Palo Alto, California, a school serving kids who were trying to be first in their family to go to college, I said, yes. I really loved the opportunity to be able to bring what I had learned to young people. And it was that experience, which is when the light bulb went off. That's when I saw both what the impact the class could have on the students and their eagerness to learn, their thirst for knowledge, but then also their parents started reaching out. And I realized there was a real ripple effect here. If you educate a classroom of students, you also have the opportunity for those lessons to be brought home. And so that's kind of what got me hooked. I taught that summer class for eight years. And about 2 or 3 years into that, I said, you know what, I have to take this passion of mine and do something more. And that was kind of the founding of NextGen Personal Finance.
That's a great story. And I love your quote too, because sometimes when I look back on what I did as a kid, I'm thinking that really formed who I am today, good or bad. It did form that. That's a great story. So how did you get from, a lot of times we have like a light bulb moment or, we think of something, but it takes action and execution to get from like A to B to C and have a website like you have and the following. So how did you get there and what gaps did you see that you knew I have to fill those?
Yeah, it all starts, every startup, and having done this 3 or 4 times myself, every startup has serendipity. The serendipitous moment really was quite early In fact, it was the first day when we officially became a nonprofit. And that was co-founder Jessica Endlich joining us, because I'm the wild-eyed entrepreneur with a million different ideas. She's the educator. She's the one who laid down the tracks for, this is how we're going to create curriculum that teachers love. And so when you talk about from A to B to C, that's really how our organization has evolved. Well, the first thing we needed to figure out was curriculum. I thought at the time I got this started that this might have been the dumbest idea I'd ever come up with, because there are no shortage of resources available to personal finance teachers. So what gave me the hubris to think I could create something different? And so we really spent the first 2.5 years, a small group of us, really just building out curriculum and trying and really listening to teachers. I think ultimately we had some great early adopter teachers who were very liberal in terms of the feedback that they gave us. And so we wanted to create something. We called it the 4 C's. That was kind of our organizing principle when it came to curriculum. So first was customizable, like the ability for teachers to take what we create and then actually make it their own. So by putting it in Google Docs, that allowed teachers to file, make a copy, and then customize it. Current was really important. Financial services changes so rapidly. We wanted to stay apace of all of this change. I think a third was comprehensive. We wanted to create one site that teachers could come to, the one-stop shop, so to speak. And so you'll see there's a lot of resources available on our website. And the last was curated, which is the idea there's a lot of great information out on the internet, but you have to organize it well. And so really looking and finding, great videos, great interactives that existed, and then creating activities around them. So that was kind of step one. Once we figured out that there were teachers flocking to our website, the next thing we realized is professional development. There's a real need to ensure that teachers feel confident and highly qualified in order to teach this class. And so, we started with virtual kind of webinars, and then we shifted to in-person. We called them FinCamps, and then the pandemic hit and we shifted all of our stuff online. And what that enabled us to do is create a scalable solution so that we've reached over 17,000 teachers in the past 4 years who've invested on average 25 hours with us. And so that ability, and I have to say, one of the joys of my role is working with teachers around these topics, because they are so, just as students are thirsty for this knowledge, they are too, because not only do they feel like, okay, I'm walking away with resources that I can use in my classroom, but they're also learning about financial tips that they can use in their own lives. And so that's really powerful to see. And then the third thing, the C we had to solve, was how do we ensure more students get financial education? That's where advocacy came in. So for years, we had a grassroots program because we saw passionate educators standing up at board meetings and saying, we need to guarantee every student in our district gets this before they graduate. We saw that. We saw the fervor they brought to it. We saw how passionate they were. And then we realized about 3 years ago, if we wanted to create faster change, we needed to think about it at the state level. And it was at that point we really started to focus on state level advocacy. And I'll talk a little bit later about the growth we've seen in this movement, but that was really the third piece. So we've kind of had to learn as we go. And we've had, again, I cannot say enough about our co-founder, Jessica Endlich, and the amazing team we've assembled at NGPF, and then also just this amazing community of educators that we are so lucky and fortunate to partner with every day.
I think in any organization, you have to have the dreamer, kind of, it sounds like you, right? That's dreaming and thinking of all these different things and pushing the envelope. And then you have to have someone who can help implement and execute on that, right? And it sounds like you have that perfect combination or team with Jessica.
Absolutely. She's the one who can take an idea and really dive in deep to say, okay, how does this serve our mission? I think kind of that was something early on that she really pushed, which helped us focus. Everything we do is in support of this Mission 2030. Are the activities we're doing today going to help get us get us to that point. And that's just been, because I think it was a couple years in before we made that bold, what we call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. I think it was a couple years in before we did that. But once we did, it really helped. And then just leading an organization where everybody on the team is aligned with this goal is incredibly powerful too.
No, I love that. I looked on there and I listened to the testimonials. You have a dashboard. Maybe we can get into that in a little while with the advocacy piece, but you have the bills, everything's on there. So anyone who's listening here, go on the website. It's MGPF, correct? NGPF.
NGPF.org.
.org. Go on there and then just there. That's really cool. I will say one other, when I met you, I think many months ago, last year at some point, I went on and I was looking at some of the education. And the one that struck me was on social media. So it's like a little course that says, everybody, you want to be an influencer? Well, here's the plan to be an influencer, and you have to do so many posts and all. So it gives the more of the framework, and I think the daunting kind of statistics on if you want to be successful, here what you need to do. And I was like telling everybody, like, you got to have, if someone wants to be an influencer, send them there because it's important. I mean, that's the education you have out there.
Yeah, we wanted to make it fun too. So, the game you're describing is called Influenced, and it's one of 11 games in our arcade, which frankly is the most popular part of our website. And what we wanted to do with that game was really, there are so many folks who want to be influencers, and really let's give them a real life perspective on the work that goes into it. Because when you see the successes out there, they often gloss over, well, what does this mean on a day-to-day basis? And so that was really the goal of Influenced. We have another game called Time for Payback, which really is a journey to and through college, all of the decision making that goes into it. Our most popular game is called Stacks, which is basically 20 years of investing decisions over 20 minutes. So to introduce students to a variety of assets they can invest in, including this thing called an index fund, right? A low cost, diversified set of stocks that they can purchase. And so within each of these games, and parents can, play these games with their children, because we've included reflection worksheets with those games too, because we want to make sure there are lessons coming out of them. So not only are they fun, but they're packed with real life application, real life. We're putting students into situations that they can then apply as they do things like start to invest, as they consider careers, as they start to think about what they're going to do after high school.
I love that. I mean, that's a really good way to get your kids into kind of just understanding, right? The financial piece. That's great. You know what? When my son graduated college, I gave him a spread. I didn't do anything that great. Gave him a spreadsheet. I said, you're making X, you're spending X, you need to save this. And he has, every year. So I said, this is where you need to go.
That's a really popular activity in our budgeting unit. We call it create a salary-based budget. And we have students think about life beyond high school. So whether they're going right into the workforce, going to a 2-year college, a 4-year college, whatever path they choose. But and it's a spreadsheet, and it takes them through, I think there's like 30 steps. So they understand all of the various budget items, and it's all about them making choices. And at the end, you look at the income coming in, you look at the expenses going out, and we start with pay yourself first. So there's savings that come off the top, and then they look at the bottom, and your budget has to balance. And I think that's where many young people have that aha moment of, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a degree. This is what the average salary is. Boy, this is what I can afford coming out of college. And it's not necessarily your own apartment, a new car, all of these things. And so let's have that conversation early on, so that as folks are thinking about their career choice, for example, is that career choice going to match kind of the lifestyle that they expect?
That's great. I'm going to have to look for that. That sounds really good. So maybe now we can just switch gears a bit and talk about Mission 2030 and kind of what you're envisioning and where you're headed. because it's a lofty goal, but it sounds like you're getting there. So I'm so excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, it is. It is certainly a lofty goal, but it gets me out of bed every morning. This idea that, so first of all, the why Mission 20, why is this class so important, and why should it be delivered in high school? And I think it starts with need. Okay, so in a world saturated by social media, we know that this is where I've seen surveys as high as 75% of young people are getting advice from social media. That's YouTube, that's Reddit, that's TikTok. And the unfortunate part is if they don't have this foundational course, they're not able to discern what's good advice versus bad. And we all know the proliferation of get rich quick schemes, which to a young mind can seem very attractive. You go on YouTube and you'll see day trading systems, right? Buy our system for $239 and you can live like me. And they have the fancy house and the nice car. And it sounds too good to be true. And unfortunately, if you haven't had that, if you're not learning in school how to look out for scams, it's very easy to kind of get roped in. So there's clearly a need. And then the demand is so strong, right? Polls that we do both nationally as well as state by state show as high as 88% of people think, yes, this absolutely should be taught in schools. And so the cool thing is over the last 2.5, 3 years, there's been a tremendous movement nationwide. So a lot of people are surprised to hear that there are currently 25 states that require a 1-semester course in personal finance for high schoolers to graduate. And that's up from 8 states just 3 years ago. So we've gone from 8 to 25 states. That's 53% of young people. And again, I think we went through the pandemic, which obviously showed the precarious nature of many families' finances. But I think there's also, because we've lobbied and advocated probably over 30 states now, there's the students and the teachers are really leading this movement. When we go and participate in hearings, because a bill gets introduced and then it's heard usually by the education committee, and we see these students and teachers standing up and saying, here's the impact the course is having on my life. I think that is really powerful for legislators to hear. And so I think that's been one of the real drivers. And there's a study that came out just recently that we collaborated with a consulting firm on, that found we wanted to quantify what is the benefit, what's the lifetime benefit of taking a course in personal finance. And it's funny because I asked a group of teachers this question, and they were much more, let's say, optimistic than what this study found. The study found it was basically 6 figures, $100,000. So a student who takes this course in high school will accrue $100,000 in benefits. And the strongest, the most important aspect of the course. So I encourage listeners, if you're thinking, okay, what do I need to make sure my child or young people in my life, what do they need to know? It's about managing credit. It's about, when you think about the lifetime benefits, so a personal finance course can add points to a credit score. When you think about a lifetime of borrowing of cars and homes, the amount of savings you get by having a 30-point higher credit score means you're going to be able to borrow at a much lower rate, and you're going to be much more attuned to the downside of high cost debt also. So you're much less likely to take on high interest credit, with the most, the biggest example being credit card debt, right? Half of America has a revolving credit when it comes to use of credit cards, and the average interest rate on those now are 24%. And so that's the benefits that come from this. So I'm really excited, so we're halfway there today. There's several large states that are in play right now, including New York, where the Board of Regents is going to be considering a graduation requirement around personal finance in May of this year. We've got active bills in Illinois. And then in California, we're going to be announcing, this is the week of March 10th. We're going to be announcing this week that we have more than enough signatures in order to get on the ballot, the November 2024 ballot that would guarantee all California high schoolers, and there's about 450,000 who graduate every year, that all of them will benefit from a one semester course in personal finance. So we've made tremendous strides to get where we are today, and I'm more hopeful than ever that we'll be able to accomplish this goal by the year 2030.
That's fantastic. I mean, congratulations, because you've been out there.
We're only halfway there. We got a lot of work left to do, Denise.
Yeah, but it's very encouraging, because I think about if kids had that financial acumen, and then community college is free. I mean, for most, and there's just so much opportunity, especially in California, to once you start lifting all boats, right? Everybody just enjoys the benefit. So if we can do that, and we know that a statistic we know is that we go into community colleges a lot. That's one of our programs, community college to CPA. A lot of the CPAs are first career college students. I was. And so we see that. So there's a tremendous opportunity for all this to work together and to really, just lift individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point in terms of it takes a village to kind of make this happen. So I often get a lot of questions from folks in the financial profession, such as CPAs or maybe financial advisors, and they want to help. They want to do more. And I always think about it along a continuum in terms of how folks can help. I think if you have a child in elementary, middle, or high school, well, volunteer in their classroom to do a money lesson or money activity. The only tip I'd give you there is, because I learned this in the classroom, is you've got to you got to bring something in terms of an activity versus I thought I had all this knowledge I wanted to bring to young people. And about 5 minutes into my little speech, they lost interest. And so the real need to have a game or an activity. And again, everything on our website, ngpf.org, is free. And as well as any training that folks want to go through. And so that's kind of, if you're more ambitious, maybe it's a series of workshops, maybe it's an after school program. You kind of start there. And then if you want to advocate, again, you could advocate at the local school level, conversations with principals, or find a teacher. It all starts, if personal finance is not being taught at your child's school today, it really starts with finding one teacher who's passionate enough about it to do the work that's required to get an elective on the books. And then if you want to go to the far extreme, there's some great folks along this journey who've advocated at the state level, where they have relationships with representatives, or they're attending these hearings and saying, I'm a financial services professional, and here's why I think this is really important. And so I think that perspective can also be very powerful. So a lot of different places to plug in. Take advantage of the existing networks you have in order to make a difference.
Now, that's great advice. And we've been talking too, right, of how we can kind of, like you said, it takes a village. So how do we all work together to make sure that this such important initiative, has legs going forward and comes to fruition? So I guess one question along those lines, as you've been going through this journey, is what has been maybe the biggest surprise or challenge that you faced, that you said, oh, I didn't really know that would be there, or it's interesting that this came up?
Yeah, they come up every day. So I really think kind of the A to B to C, kind of, we started with curriculum, and then we uncovered the fact that teachers were really eager to teachers are lifelong learners. And it was really thinking about how do we create professional development that teachers will love. And within education, professional development often is not something that teachers want to flock to. And so I think that was a challenge for us to think about, okay, how are we going to create these sessions, both in person as well as virtual, that they're going to want to come to? And I think teachers are no different than students in that they want to be active learners. And so it was really building out. So our one day, what we call Fin Camps, are you know, 45-minute blocks where teachers we're facilitators. I think ultimately that's the role we see versus standing in front and saying, I'm going to impart all my knowledge to you. It's really taking on the role of facilitator. And I think that's the way we've crafted our curriculum too, is that teachers don't need to feel like the phrase sage on stage, but they're just facilitating, because a vibrant personal finance class is one that's full of discussion. It's full of students learning from each other. It's full of students kind of communicating back to their peers about the work, about what they're learning. So that, that would just be one example on professional development. And then I think the other piece, which I alluded to earlier, was just the advocacy, which was, how can we ensure more students get this course? And I have to say, the speed at which this has occurred has been a bit of a surprise. However, when you stop to think about, it's one of these comments in a political world that's incredibly challenging, right? Where there are folks on both sides of the aisle who feel very strongly about certain issues. This is not a polarizing issue. This is one, doesn't matter whether you're left, right, middle. And that's what we found consistently. When these bills go to the floor of a Senate or a House, within a state Senate or a state House, the vote counts are like 98% in support. And so it's remarkable on the one hand at the pace at which is, because we've never seen it go. Obviously, we've never seen it triple in terms of the number of states. But when you stop to think about, when you ask people if this makes sense, everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. So I will say the next challenge on the horizon, because, once you feel like, okay, we've made tremendous progress here, it opens another door, as you alluded to. It's around implementation. How do we ensure the 15 states that are currently in the process, because usually there's a 3 or 4 year implementation period, how do we ensure that it gets done successfully? Because legislation without effective implementation is worthless. Like, ultimately, it's about ensuring students have the best experience in the classroom.
So important, right? Because then it continues to have a life. So
yes,
it's definitely key. So what do you think, as we're closing out here, what would be the 3 tips, Tim, you would give our listeners today to say you should share this with kids, or something you should just have top of mind as you go out and you speak to young professionals?
Yeah, so particularly for young people, get a job. Like, I really think a part-time job for a young person is so pivotal. Why? Well, number one, you're never going to think about money the same way again. You're going to think about money as, well, that thing I want to buy is not $10, but it's an hour of work. There's a work unit there. And then you also just think about all the personal finance concepts that get embedded in a job. You have a pay stub. You learn about taxes. You learn about this thing called direct deposit, which means you're going to have a bank account, which means maybe you can set up an automated savings. You're going to learn, maybe I can split my check between savings and checking. So you're going to have to learn how to manage those accounts. You're going to have the opportunity to save for retirement, Roth IRAs. And people always laugh when I say that. They're like, how can you get a high schooler to invest for the future? And yet there are teachers across the country, several in California, that have. Christopher Jackson down in Southern California. Shout out to you, Christopher, for having a board in his classroom where students, I think there were 30 students last semester who set up IRAs, and then there's the soft skills. You got to learn to work with other people. You got to learn to work as part of a team. That's part of a job. And now that you have money coming in, maybe you're starting to think about budgeting. And so that one thing, getting a job, actually just the process of getting that job too, whether it's you have a LinkedIn profile, you had to fill out an application, you had to interview. That's all wrapped up in just a part-time job. I think that's incredibly valuable. Moving beyond that, I think the power of compounding, just helping young people see, and there's some great compound calculator, compounding calculators out there. If you save $100 a month and you can earn a return in the stock market, like here's how that wealth can grow. And then, this is kind of really deep into the weeds, but if you're a parent or guardian that has a high credit score, you can help your young person build credit. Again, this is going to be dependent on the credit card provider, but you can sign up your child as an authorized user on your card, and they can start building a credit history. But again, that's deep in the weeds. You have to do the research because not every credit card reports to the credit bureaus and allows you to do that. But that's kind of another tip. It's a real gift you can give a young person. I remember I was speaking at a college, and a young person raised their hand to brag that they had a 720 credit score. And I said, wow, that seems pretty high for such a young person. And they talked about how their parents had signed them up as an authorized user on their card. So actually, the young person doesn't even have to use the card. It's just they, in effect, benefit from the history. But again, it's only works when the parent or guardian has a high credit score. Then because obviously you wouldn't want to saddle your child or if you have a low credit score. So that would be my third tip. Just in terms of books, often people ask about books. For high schoolers, there's a great book written by someone from the Gen Z generation called Gen Z Money Sense from Ella Gupta. I found that very impressive. If you're looking for podcasts and you have a middle schooler, there's a podcast called Million Bazillion. And then if you have a high schooler, there's a new podcast called Financially Inclined. And so those would be other ways. As a parent, it can often be a very difficult conversation to have about money. And I always think you don't need to have a conversation about money. You just need to talk about money as you go about your daily life. You're in the supermarket. Hey, what's the difference between generics and brands? Your child's about to start driving. Hey, let's look at an insurance policy. When you go to open a bank account with them, let them do the talking. Like sit down with them and say, you're going to, if we're going to meet with the bank manager, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. Just really think about how you're going about your daily life and where money's involved. I've heard from young people who remember their parents sitting down with them and having them pay bills one month. So they understand how that works. Let's make this practical. Let's make it hands-on, and let's not make a big deal of it. Just anywhere you're interacting with money. What's the difference between a debit and credit card? A third of young people don't know what the difference. Well, when you're at the checkout line at the supermarket, tap your credit card and ask your child, hey, where'd that money come from? And when do I have to pay it back? Like those sorts of things. Again, I'm the weird guy who's always talking about it in the supermarket. So if you see me online and I'm taking a little bit longer, I apologize in advance.
That was in one of your testimonials. Someone asked them, do you want cash back? And they were like, yeah, I thought it was free.
Yeah.
So it's just, I thought that was fascinating because my life has always been, that's just who I am, right? I was wired that way. But, and what you're saying about the money, I think there's more. I saw a Gen Z study as well from, it was actually EY, but it said, this generation is more focused on like the saving, the investing. I don't know if you're seeing that, but the money conversations are, I think, more open than they used to be. How much do you make? What does this cost? Right? I think it's more open than years ago. We just didn't taboo talk about it. So that's a positive is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing the same?
We've certainly seen increase. I think the numbers have gone from like 50 to 60% of people participating in the stock market today. So I think a lot of that pandemic money that folks had, they were sitting at home, they saw opportunities to invest. So I think that's great that access has never been greater to financial markets. But I think at the same time, it really makes it even more imperative that education precedes that so that they know the difference between a very speculative investment versus, what might be considered a more moderate or, what does diversification mean versus investing in single stocks, those sorts of things.
I took a lot of notes of your stats. So so many good nuggets here, Tim. I will have to have you back for another conversation to see how your goal is going. And I'm just fascinated and I'm grateful, honestly, for the work you're doing out there that will really benefit everyone in that next generation, which is so important to us all, right?
Yeah, thank you, Denise. Thank you for all the work that Cal CPA does too, because I know this is a real priority for your community also. And like I said, it takes a village, and all of these touch points really can make a difference. It's an additive process, and love that we're kind of partnering on this mission together.
Absolutely. And like you said, the members are eager to help and talk about, financial acumen and wellness, literacy, whatever you want to call it. We need it. So it's really important. So thank you. I look forward to continuing to partner and work together. And we're going to be cheering for you just in all that you do. So thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you enjoy the show, leave us a rating and review. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.